You're listening to Stella Speaks, a podcast about bitchcraft. We take feminism, witchcraft, social justice issues, self care, throw it all in the cauldron, see what bubbles up. I hope that you stay for a spell. Today begins our question and answer series. This podcast is being recorded live on Podbean, and I'm going to answer one question in depth at the beginning of the episode, and then I'll take live questions from online audience at the end of the episode. Today's specific question is, are you a good witch or a bad witch? Before we launch in fully into the podcast, just a note that I'd want to acknowledge the indigenous history and the land of this area. So where I live is the illegally occupied ancestral lands of the Erie, the Kaskaskia, and the Mississauga. For more information about that land, you can go to the podcast that I published April 20th. It's called Listen First, Declutter Your Witchcraft Introduction. About 5 minutes in, I give some details about those individuals. And if you're interested in looking up the indigenous history of your area, check out the show description on your listening service, and I'll have some links for ways that you can explore those issues. So the labels good witch and bad witch have a long and complicated history. This is deeply intertwined with social narratives about women's power, women's autonomy. Throughout history, these labels have been used as tools to control and suppress women. Just the label witch at all, and then the label good, bad, Madonna, and whore, all of these kind of dichotomous false binaries around women and what's acceptable under patriarchy, whether you're virtuous or wicked. And it's important to recognize that these labels aren't neutral. They carry the weight of gender expectations and societal norms. And if we say like the good witch, right, like Glinda the Good Witch, or a positive enchantress, this label can represent conformity, purity, subservience, while the bad witch label is more associated with independence, assertiveness, and then, of course, villainy. And then these binary portrayals really limit the complexity and the diversity of women's experiences and expressions of power, and also what witchcraft is and what it means to be a witch. So feminist witchcraft challenges these limiting labels by encouraging us to reclaim and reshape them in a way that aligns with our own values and feminist principles. It's about embracing the power and agency that comes with being a witch, kind of irrespective of societal judgments, in a way in the face of these societal judgments. Like, we are reclaiming the word witch. If it's a word that has been used to denigrate women specifically, but other people as well, to create violence and persecution. And so it's really intentional that in the witchcraft revival that we use the word witch very intentionally. We don't have to use the word witch. We could say magician, we can say pagan if that label applies. But a lot of us really choose to use the word witch because we're saying that we're kind of aligning ourselves and allying ourselves with women throughout history, and other people, but women throughout history who have had their power and their agency called into question over these patriarchal nonsense, essentially. So how do we reclaim this? How do we reshape it? Well, we can start with acknowledging historical context, the ways that these words have been weaponized against women. If we understand the origin of the label witch or evil witch or the evil wicked stepmother, evil witch, these things, we can dismantle their oppressive power and reclaim them as sources of empowerment. It's about embracing the full spectrum of our own power and acknowledging that power doesn't fit into neat boxes. And we can honor the complexities and the contradictions within ourselves and rejecting this notion that we have to conform to a singular archetype. Honestly, even within the witchy community, there's some of this conformity nonsense. So Robert Graves, the poet, wrote a book called The White Goddess that a lot of, it has influenced modern pagan thought, even though I don't think he was particularly pagan. And he kind of introduced this concept of maiden, mother, crone, which is that in many cultures, there's this tendency to have these different roles for goddesses, saints, etc. The maiden, the mother, and the crone. So, like, an obvious example would be like in Snow White. Snow White is the maiden. The evil stepmother could be the mother figure, I suppose. And then when she's in her hag form, she would be the crone. And there are instances of goddesses that have triple forms, some of which neatly fall into this maiden, mother, crone label, but many who don't. And so there are moves within the witchy community to even dismantle some of these labels that, when used in a descriptive way, can be useful, but when they're used in a prescriptive way, they can be very limiting to people's experiences, and they can kind of put a barrier up between authentically engaging with an archetypal energy of a goddess. When you're perceiving this goddess as a maiden or a good witch or a hag or a crone or a bad witch, and you're labeling in that way, you're reducing that archetype, that goddess, to that one function. And similarly, if you label yourself a good witch, a bad witch, then you are similarly limiting your own full spectrum. So, as feminist witches, we have the opportunity to redefine what that means. What does it mean to be a witch? What does it even mean to be good or to be bad? Or these labels that we don't want to apply to ourselves? We can challenge the patriarchal standards of goodness and wickedness, create space for our authentic selves to emerge, celebrating, our autonomy, our strength, our unique expressions of magic. If we can reclaim and reshape these labels, we also pave the way for a more inclusive and diverse witchcraft community. We can invite people in a way that when we're using these labels, people can feel excluded. The Wizard of Oz, I think, gives us a really interesting lens through which we can examine these archetypes. So this question, are you a good witch or a bad witch, that Glinda asks Dorothy when she lands in Oz in the film, really shows us clearly, okay, there's good witches and bad witches. Which is, hey, that's a step, right? Like, even the concept that there is a idea of a good witch was kind of formative for me when I watched this movie as a kid. I was like, oh, witches can be good. They don't have to be bad. So that was actually instructive and informative to me as a little one when I was watching The Wizard of Oz over and over again when I was like 3 and 4. So we have Glinda, the good witch of the North. She's depicted as benevolent, beautiful. She represents light and purity, traditional notions of goodness and femininity. Then we have the Wicked Witch of the West, who is the villain. She's green and she cackles and she wants power, and she's going to get it no matter who she has to harm. And these archetypes aren't as simple as they may seem initially. The Wizard of Oz story does offer a deeper exploration of these characters, especially, in different retellings, or if you read more than just the first book in this whole series and world, there's some more stuff there. We can also think too, like, how good is Glinda? She appears so kind and helpful, but she's not transparent. She has all this knowledge and power, but she withholds information. She has Dorothy go on this whole long, treacherous journey without revealing the truth, that she could just click her heels and go back to Kansas in the film version. That's not how it works in the book. So what does that even mean? So how good is she? And then the Wicked Witch, her sister literally just died, and she wants her sister's shoes. Like, how is that even that evil? Like, how is that bad? Oh, my beloved sister just died. Can I please have her shoes? No, this random little girl that killed my sister gets to keep her shoes? What the actual hell, right? So we have to kind of deconstruct and question these binary narratives. And Wicked does that a little bit. So if you're familiar with there's a musical called Wicked, and then there is also a book. The book by Gregory Maguire that it's based on takes the story a little bit more seriously, where Wicked, the musical, is a little silly. It is powerful, it has powerful moments, but it doesn't really treat its subject matter very seriously. But in Wicked, Glinda, who's the good quote unquote good witch, right? And then Elphaba, so she gets a name. It's the name for the Wicked Witch of the West. In that retelling, they're no longer confined to these traditional roles as good and wicked. So the story unfolds to reveal a much more intricate, nuanced exploration. Glinda's kind of this popular, conformist, kind of mean girl who represents the pressure of societal expectations, the desire for acceptance, while Elphaba, who's this green-skinned outcast, emerges as, being principled, standing for something, being compassionate, questioning the oppressive structures around her. So that exposes that Alpha was not wicked at all. She's trying to help the animals in her kingdom to have power and autonomy. And how good is Glinda, But even if in the beginning you kind of think, oh, she's this bubbly airhead, popular mean girl, you learn more about her too, that there is some tenderness to her. And Elphaba's not perfect either. So there's a lot more depth there. And I think that gives us a nice little snapshot of why I feel like the good and wicked labels don't really apply. They don't really apply to me and in my personal craft. So if someone asks me if I'm a good witch, I'm like, whoa, what does that mean? Like, am I good at it? But what I think they mean, I don't think they mean, are you good at it? Like, are your spells successful? When people ask, are you a good witch or a bad witch? They're asking, like, do you do bad witchcraft? Do you do hexes and curses and things like that? And first of all, your practice is your practice. I have my personal opinion. I've talked about that before on the podcast about what I'm going to just loosely call malevolent magic. That's magic that is intending to harm someone or something. A hex, a curse, a binding, a banishing, maybe all these different spells that could be considered, malevolent or interfering with a person's free will, things like that. Well, so what does that mean too? Like, does that mean if I've ever cursed someone, am I now a quote unquote bad witch? The relationship between the use of curses and your own moral character is more complex than the simple dichotomy. So engaging in malevolent magic, hexes, curses on a few occasions doesn't necessarily mean that you're a bad witch. Like intent, context, these things play crucial roles in understanding the ethics behind these practices. Now, some may argue that any form of malevolent magic is always and inherently unjustified, and anything that interferes with a person's free will is malevolent magic. But other people believe that there are instances where it could be justified. So part of this intense scrutiny is kind of due to some persecution early on. So the early witchcraft revival books in like the 60s and 70s, and then in the aftermath of the Satanic Panic of the 80s, so in the books of the 90s, these books and writers and public figures really kept emphasizing that witches don't do curses. Witches never hurt people. Witches are always good. Witches never engage in malevolent magic. It was PR. And a lot of those people were acting out of the truth of their own experience, so that they never curse. People in their coven never curse. But overall, saying that witches never curse is not aligned with the diverse experiences of contemporary witches or witchcraft throughout antiquity. Many practitioners like myself approach spells involving others You could do it from a behavior modification standpoint, healing, cleansing, truth revealing angle, rather than just causing harm for harm's sake. Now, these spells may cause a level of discomfort or consequences for the targeted individual, but they're typically driven by a deeper purpose than pure like malevolence. Like, we aren't walking around just being evil for evil's sake. I mean, there's probably a couple of people out there who are doing that, but I'd say that that is really rare. Most witches are like most people. They are living their lives and making the decisions that are best for them and for their families and doing their best on a day-to-day basis. So I am not super into cursing. I will always try to approach things from a different angle. But if the stakes are high enough and my cause is just and righteous, I consult divination, spend some time in meditation. I have done and would do magic that is not 100% pure, good, and so forth. Now, it's important also to recognize that the discussions around ethics can be very subjective. So it varies from person to person, different belief systems. As we navigate our paths, we have to engage in these thoughtful, introspective, and contemplative questions. Like, spend some time thinking about the consequences of your actions, what kind of person to be. And the decision is ultimately yours if you decide to utilize malevolent magic. But I would approach it with careful consideration, rooted in your own personal ethics and being driven by genuine intentions. If this is the very first time you found my podcast and you have done absolutely no witchcraft or research, like, jumping in and hexing is the first thing that you do is not a good idea, in my opinion. Like, get to know the system before you start casting naughty spells at people. But I would never say never about malevolent magic. A caveat. So when we discuss this false dichotomy of good and bad witchcraft, some people, and I even within the last year, I've had people ask me if I am a white witch or if I do black magic. So this concept of white magic and black magic may come up. Now, these terms didn't pop up yesterday. They were initially used to differentiate between benevolent and malevolent practices. So maybe it's not explicitly racist, but I personally choose to steer clear of using these terms in my practice and discussion. Associating white with goodness and black with evil can perpetuate harmful racial stereotypes, and it reinforces a false binary that oversimplifies the complexity of magic in the first place. So if someone asks me if I do white witchcraft, I'll be like, well, I'm a white lady. Is that what you mean? But like, no, I don't associate with these terms of white and black magic. And then some people have kind of tried to reclaim gray magic, and that it's neither good nor bad. I don't get into any of this. I think a lot of those labels are not that helpful anyway. As a corollary, as another part of this discussion, people oftentimes ask, like, what kind of witch you are, and they expect some answer that comes out of a TV show, like, I'm a green witch, or I'm an electric witch, or I'm a water witch. And all of that is, I mean, you can choose to use a label like that if you want to, but it's kind of bullshit. Like, most of us don't talk like that about ourselves and our magic, unless you're doing it from like a branding perspective. Like, you're trying to build a brand on the internet about what kind of witch you are. So yeah, white magic, black magic, those terms are out the window. Personally, in my approach to witchcraft, I also refrain from terms like your higher self, high vibrations, low vibrations. They imply this hierarchical structure where certain aspects of life are deemed superior or inferior, and we're trying to raise our vibrations or something. No. By eliminating hierarchy from our understanding of magic, we promote inclusivity and we embrace the diverse experiences and expressions of ourselves in the craft, recognizing that all vibrations and aspects of the self hold value, allows us to honor the full spectrum of human experience and reject the notion that things are better than others, and to avoid this spiritual bypassing where you are just always trying to be higher and better, and you're trying to escape life and get onto a higher or better plane of existence. Or I would argue that this is probably about as good as it gets, and that our job is to engage with this world, not to try to escape it. So, destroying hierarchy within witchcraft is an essential part of fostering an inclusive and empowering community. So, if we can get rid of these hierarchical language uses and concepts, we can create space for a more equitable exchange of knowledge and experiences, where we're encouraging collaboration and empathy and respect among practitioners, allowing us to grow and learn together in a supportive environment that values every individual's unique path and their contributions. So, I don't see any specific questions in the chat right now on any of the services that I'm broadcasting live. So I will just address in a little bit more depth the idea of labeling yourself as a witch. So every now and again, there are these like BuzzFeed style quizzes that come around, like, what kind of witch are you? And it's like, oh, you're a water witch, a fire witch. I might have to do with the elements. Or they might say, oh, you're a kitchen witch, or oh, you're a book witch. And it's very simplistic. It's very memeified. It's very Cosmo quiz circa 1995, where you're trying to fit yourself into any particular box. And I just hate that. So if anyone, when people ask me, what kind of witch are you? I'm like, just sit down, I guess. Let's have a conversation. I guess if I was to say it in a quick way, I would say that I am a witch that is also pagan. I am a feminist, and my practice is one of ecofeminist witchcraft, which is essentially the concept that the earth is sacred and we engage with her as if she were a goddess, and reclaim the word witch to be someone who heals and who can make the world a better place by accessing their power. Now, that is not as quick and easy as saying, oh, I'm a kitchen witch. Oh, I'm a wand witch, or whatever these things are. But it's more true. It's more accurate. So I reject that kind of a label as well. As we're rolling into Pride Month, I think we can talk about how witches are all kinds of things, right? Like, there are all kinds of labels that sometimes feel good and sometimes fit and sometimes feel very limiting. And by using these kind of terms for ourselves, we're just limiting ourselves. Yeah, I have someone in the chat who says, I'm just a witch. Exactly. Me too. I'm just a witch. And I'm happy to have the conversation with people who are like willing and ready to have that conversation. That's why I have the podcast. That's why I ask people for questions. But just to recap, right? So the question at the beginning of this episode is, are you a good witch or a bad witch? And I would say I'm really bad at being a good witch. I don't know. I think I just reject those labels entirely and would say that I am here on earth with a passion for love and a passion for justice. And I don't think that the ends always justify the means, but I also think that there are times in which force and violence need to be used, and that may sometimes include the witchcraft that I choose to do. Now, to be very honest, I'm not a curser or a hexer. I've done very few spells that are similar to those, but I would say I'm not opposed to doing it in the right circumstance. You know, if someone that I love is affected politically, I think that when you're a public figure, it's expected that people are going to pray for you and against you, and witchcraft is a form of prayer. So, yeah, I would never rule it out. If you're interested in discussing this in more depth, I would recommend reading the book. It's an oldie but a goodie. It's from the 1980s. It's called Dreaming the Dark, and it's by Starhawk. And she talks about some of these issues in some depth. Like, these topics aren't new. These topics aren't new. We've been talking about this for decades. So it's not like, oh, everybody's so sensitive and so woke and won't say black magic anymore. Like, no, we've been talking about this for decades. And I choose gratitude, and I choose joy, and I choose love, and I choose to fall madly and deeply in love with this beautiful universe in which I find myself in this incarnation. Like, despite all the BS of the world, despite the racism and the brokenness, and the patriarchy, and so many things that we're working to combat, it's a beautiful world. And in that way, I guess I'm a good witch. I am on the world's side. I want her to thrive. I want the plants and the animals and the human beings to live in harmony and to continue to exist in this rad freaking whirl around the cosmos. And so that would be my answer to the question, are you a good witch or a bad witch? So thank you so much for listening to this episode of Stella Speaks. Keep on keeping on. For the next month or so, we'll be doing question and answers. So I have a podcast prepared about one topic, and then I open it up for questions at the end of the episode, which we are nearing now. So tune in next week, and I will see you all later. Have a fantastic day, and blessed be, bitches.